History loves to glorify kings and queens, their power, their castles, their endless portraits. But tonight, we peel back the golden frames and look at what was really happening behind those palace doors. Spoiler alert, a lot of cousin, weddings, political chess moves, and, well, questionable genetics. Welcome to tonight's episode, where we untangle the complicated, messy, and at times, downright bizarre lives of the most inbred women in medieval Europe. These weren't just victims of family politics. They were living proof of what happens when royal bloodlines turn into family circles. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe if twisted royal family drama is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it over there? It's always fun to see how far these weird corners of history reach. Alright, settle in, maybe dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's step into this tangled royal mess together. Juana of Castile, born in 1479, was the third child of two of Europe's most powerful and closely related rulers, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Yes, the same legendary duo who funded Columbus, expelled the Moors, and somehow still believed marrying your cousin was a genius political strategy. Juana belonged to Spain's Trastamara dynasty, where interfamily marriage wasn't just a tradition, it was practically mandatory. By the time she was born, the royal bloodline had been shuffled just enough to technically survive, but not enough to avoid the usual side effects: emotional instability, constant melancholy, and the occasional unfortunate JAWLINE in her teens. One was shipped off to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome. Despite the flattering nickname, Philip was more of a genetically optimized Habsburg prototype than a romantic prince. And of course, was her cousin, because the Habsburgs loved two things: hoarding crowns and completely ignoring genetic red flags. At first, the future seemed bright. Juana was intelligent, striking, and by all accounts, completely smitten with Philip. Sadly, Philip was a little less devoted to their marriage and a lot more interested in everyone who wasn't his wife. Juana's fiery personality and jealousy didn't exactly fit in at a court used to cold, strategic marriages and lukewarm loyalty. When Philip died suddenly, officially from typhoid, unofficially, some might say karma, Juana didn't take it well. And by didn't take it well, I mean she refused to be separated from his corpse. She famously traveled across Spain with his coffin, reportedly opening it from time to time to check on him. Medieval romantic, maybe. Completely unhinged, possibly convenient for her political enemies. Absolutely. Her father, Ferdinand, used Juana's grief as proof she was mentally unfit to rule. Her son, Charles, who would go on to become the Holy Roman Emperor, did the same. Conveniently, both men got to rule in her place, while Juana spent most of her life confined to a convent. Was Juana truly mad? Historians still argue about it. Some say she suffered from real mental illness, made worse by grief and isolation. Others believe she was simply inconvenient, a woman who dared to be emotional and outspoken in a world where that was basically considered treason. Either way, Juana wasn't just a tragic figure. She was the perfect storm of royal expectations. Centuries of inbreeding and absolutely disastrous coping skills. If there were a competition for the most predictable genetic disaster, Maria Anna of Spain would be holding the trophy while her son drooled on it. Born in 1634, Maria Anna was the daughter of King Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria cousins. Of course, because the Habsburgs weren't known for originality in marriage. Naturally, Maria Anna doubled down on the family tradition by marrying her uncle, Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor. Not a distant cousin, not once removed, her actual uncle. When your family tree is more of a loop, I guess doubling back makes sense. To her credit, Maria Anna was intelligent, well-educated, politically sharp, and reportedly kind-hearted. She brought grace and dignity to the imperial court, along with the genetic equivalent of photocopying a photocopy, but her most famous contribution, giving birth to Charles II of Spain, arguably the most inbred monarch in European history. Charles didn't just inherit the crown, he inherited the full, chaotic backlog of Habsburg genes: oversized jaw, weak chin, chronic illnesses, infertility, decay, and suspected cognitive delays. He struggled with basic tasks like eating and speaking, which, okay, relatable before coffee, but slightly more concerning when you're supposed to run a global empire. Was all this Maria Anna's fault? Not entirely. She didn't invent the Habsburg matchmaking playbook, but she sure played her part in keeping it alive. To be fair, she loved her son deeply and fiercely protected him from political vultures throughout his short, fragile life. Acting as regent during his minority was no easy task, more like trying to control a room full of starving toddlers armed with daggers. Maria Anna died in 1696, a year after her son. The Spanish Empire she had helped preserve fell apart soon, after collapsing into the War of Spanish Succession, a conflict sparked largely because Charles II couldn't produce an heir, because, of course, he couldn't. If you've ever wondered what happens when marriage becomes more about keeping bloodlines pure than finding new DNA, key Isabella of Habsburg, born in 1501. Isabella was the daughter of Philip the Handsome. Yes, that Philip again in Juana of Castile, better known as Juana the Mad. Though honestly, by this point, Juana the understandably stressed feels more accurate. This made Isabella both a sister to Emperor Charles V and a niece to half of Europe, her family tree. Less of a mystery, more of a recipe, repeated way too. Many times, base of Habsburg, a dash of Trastamara, and absolutely no fresh ingredients. At the age of 17, Isabella married Christian II of Denmark. With that tangled story, well, that's a tale for another night. Isabella of Habsburg, born in 1501, was married off to Christian II of Denmark, a king best known for his unpredictable policies, erratic moods, and the general energy of a man who was always one bad breakfast away from declaring war on the furniture. Their marriage, as expected, political, awkward, and genetically complicated. Sure, they were cousins, because of course they were, but the real kicker was Isabella's Habsburg heritage, which was already looping in on itself like a medieval screensaver. She was expected to bring charm, political stability, and maybe, just maybe, distract everyone from the fact that her family tree looked less like a tree and more like a tightly wound wreath. Life in the Danish court wasn't exactly a fairy tale. For Isabella, Christian's rule quickly fell apart. He was overthrown, imprisoned, and eventually exiled. Spella, in true Habsburg fashion, stuck by him. Whether it was love or just good old-fashioned hereditary stubbornness, we may never know. Years of political exile, royal chaos, and constant stress took their toll. Isabella's health declined, and she died young, at just 24. Possibly from childbirth complications, illness, or just being caught in the exhausting mess of royal politics. Naturally, their children kept the noble family tradition alive, which is to say, the inbreeding didn't stop. Their daughter, Dorothea, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, yet another solid Habsburg-approved match. After all, if there's one thing the dynasty valued more than jawlines and fancy titles, was making sure every family gathering required 0 name tags. Next up, Eleanor of Austria. Born in 1498, already off to a rough start, being sandwiched between the Renaissance and 1,000 royal expectations. She was the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile, making her the older sister of Emperor Charles V and the proud owner of deluxe, top-tier Habsburg genetics. Eleanor's childhood, less of a fairy tale, more of a diplomatic waiting room for teenage years, a revolving door of almost marriages. At one point, she was even promised to Henry VIII of England, but that deal fell apart. Lucky her. Honestly, dodging that. Marriage may have been one of the only times Habsburg inbreeding improved someone's quality of life. Instead, Leonor's first marriage was to Manuel I of Portugal, not only much older, but also her first cousin, once removed. In the royal world, that basically counts as marrying the guy from 2 doors down the hall. She became Queen of Portugal, had 2 children, was widowed, all before turning 30. Naturally, the solution? Marry her off again. It's time to Francis I of France, a man who had previously been held prisoner by her brother, Charles V, romantic, right? Francis wasn't particularly fond of Eleanor. He saw her less as a wife and more as a political olive branch, wrapped in Habsburg packaging. Their marriage was cold and childless. He spent most of his time with mistresses, while Eleanor buried herself in books, prayers, politely pretending not to notice. Despite being Queen of France, Eleanor stayed loyal to her Habsburg roots. And honestly, can you blame her? They may have been inbred, but at least they were predictable. Eleanor outlived both her husbands, quietly retreating into the political shadows. She died in 1558, remembered for her composure, piety, and the remarkable ability to survive 2 royal marriages without a single public scandal. An Olympic-level achievement in her family. Her life, a masterclass in silent endurance. She may not have sparked wars or headlines, but she fulfilled the Habsburg woman's ultimate job description. Marry the cousin, produce the heir, and pretend the family resemblance isn't getting more obvious every generation. Catherine of Aragon, born in 1485, was the child of Spain's most powerful couple, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Basically, Spain's power couple and part-time creators of Europe's tightest family tree. As the daughter of 2 United Kingdoms, Catherine had it all: wealth, education, titles, and a family tree that circled tighter than a medieval tavern song. By age 3, Catherine was already promised to Arthur, Prince of Wales, eldest son of Henry VII, because Europe's royal families had an adorable habit of marrying cousins to other cousins, preferably with matching coats of arms. Catherine and Arthur were second cousins through John of Gaunt, which in noble terms basically means they were practically strangers. The 2 married in 1501. 5 months later, Arthur died. Whether or not the marriage was consummated became the historical cliffhanger that would define England for generations, sparking religious upheaval, political battles, and enough legal arguments to keep historians busy to this day. For Catherine, it meant years stuck in diplomatic limbo. A teenage widow stuck in England. No husband, no dowry, no clear future, and still just a pawn on the chessboard of royal politics. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother, and eventually Catherine's second husband. 'Cause, apparently, reusing names, titles, and spouses was a royal tradition at this point, early on. Their marriage was actually affectionate. Catherine was intelligent, graceful, politically savvy, everything Henry needed: Spanish alliance, royal prestige, and 5 pregnancies. But only one child, Mary, later Mary I, survived. Unfortunately, Henry wasn't after prestige. He wanted a son. And when Catherine couldn't deliver one, things spiraled from awkward to apocalyptic. Henry declared the marriage invalid, claiming, conveniently, that marrying his brother's widow wasn't allowed. Catherine, backed by the Pope, insisted it was perfectly legitimate. Thus began one of the most dramatic annulment sagas in history, complete with theological debates, political blackmail, and one stubborn king creating an entirely new church, just to ditch his wife. Catherine was banished, stripped of her title, and lived out her days isolated, still insisting she was Henry's rightful queen. Her royal blood may have been blue, but it was also suspiciously concentrated. Her marriage didn't just reshape English history, it served as one more cautionary tale of what happens when family trees go in circles. Margaret of Austria, born in 1480, was destined for political maneuvering before she could even walk. Thus, the only daughter of Emperor Maximilian of Austria and Mary of Burgundy. She was a Habsburg by birth, which basically meant her family tree looked like a circle drawn by a toddler with a crown. By age 3, she was engaged to Charles VIII of France. By age 12, she was sent back, returned like a poorly fitted wedding dress when Charles decided to marry someone else. Anne of Brittany came with better geography. Margaret, humiliated but composed, famously declared, "I shall be revenged." And honestly, she was. Her second engagement, to John of Castile, son of Ferdinand and Isabella, and naturally, her cousin. The match was designed to strengthen Habsburg-Spanish relations and keep the gene pool as shallow as humanly possible. John died shortly after their marriage. Margaret, still under 20, was twice rejected by fate, once by choice, once by death. She received other offers, including from the sons of Henry VII, but Margaret had officially retired from the royal marriage lottery. She never remarried, dedicating herself to politics, art, and a far more exhausting job, surviving her relatives, appointed governor of the Netherlands by her nephew, Charles V. Margaret ruled with intelligence, diplomacy, and the signature Habsburg grit. She brokered treaties, managed volatile regions, earned a rare reputation as a woman trusted with real power, possibly because she wasn't busy birthing her uncle's cousin's heir. Despite the never-ending dynastic drama, Margaret lived a remarkably scandal-free life. She collected art, patronized music, and even tried to teach young Charles how to govern a nearly impossible task, considering he was emperor by 19 and related to half the planet. Margaret died in 1530, the result of a minor foot injury turning fatal, because, well, medieval medicine was just an elaborate way of saying, "You'll probably die from that." She remains one of the few Habsburg women remembered more for her politics than her pedigree, though. Make no mistake, her pedigree was still alarmingly inbred. Blanche of Castile, born in 1188, arrived at a time when noble families still thought marrying your cousin was a brilliant political move rather than a genetic gamble. As the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England, and the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, Blanche entered the world with more royal blood than hemoglobin. By the time she could walk, her family was already strategizing which relative she'd marry. The winner, Louis VIII of France, her cousin. Not a distant third cousin once removed. More like, hey, we share grandparents. Should we really be doing this? But this was medieval royalty. If your intended didn't share at least one family tree branch with you, the marriage was considered a diplomatic failure at age 12. Blanche sailed to France to marry Louis. His father, King Philip II, famously remarked, "She is small, but she will grow charming." Blanche of Castile married Louis VIII of France in 1200, launching herself into a lifetime of royal chess, religious fervor, and politely pretending not to notice that most of her husband's ancestors were also hers. But Blanche wasn't just a decorative queen. When Louis became king, she was his queen consort. And after his death, she became the real power behind the throne, ruling as regent for her young son, Louis IX, later known as St. Louis. She ran France like a woman who understood exactly how unstable her extended, overly connected family really was. Blanche organized crusades, crushed rebellions, and managed to keep the kingdom intact, all while handling a group of nobles who doubted her because she was both a woman and, in their eyes, a little too Castilian for their liking. She responded with diplomacy, force, and when necessary, good old-fashioned house arrest. Genetically, Blanche represented generations of royal consolidation, English, Castilian, French, all mashed together into one determined little queen. If DNA came with warning lights, Blanche's would have been blinking furiously. She was devout, was fiercely protective of her children, and, absolutely, not to be underestimated. Her son, Louis IX, may have become a saint, but Blanche was the one who kept him alive long enough to earn the title. Next up, Anne of Bohemia and Hungary. Born in 1503, which, in Habsburg terms, basically meant she entered the world with half a crown and half a family reunion already running through her veins. Her parents were Władysław II of Hungary and Bohemia and Anne of Foix-Candale. And while that second Anne might sound like fresh genetic material, don't be fooled. This was still very much a royal marriage arranged within the same tangled web Anne grew up. Knowing her future wasn't hers, she'd be married off, like a particularly valuable diplomatic briefcase. And sure enough, at 18, she married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, future Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. Yes, double first cousin, meaning they shared both sets of grandparents. Basically, a mirror match, genetically speaking. In modern times, marrying your double first cousin might raise eyebrows. In the Habsburg world, it raised dynastic stability and probably the risk of birth defects. But hey, priorities. Despite the genetic roulette, the marriage was politically golden. It united the Habsburgs with the crowns of Hungary and Bohemia and produced, brace yourself, 15 children. 'Cause if you're going to consolidate royal bloodlines, why not go all in? Anne herself was known as pious, kind, and dutiful, which is a polite way of saying she didn't complain while being used as human glue holding together half of Europe's political puzzle. She followed Ferdinand across the empire, holding court wherever needed, reminding everyone the Habsburgs was still in charge and still very much into family weddings. Sadly, Anne died young in 1547, likely worn out from years of childbirth, politics, and pretending her family wasn't aggressively in love with itself. She didn't live to see Ferdinand crowned Holy Roman Emperor, but through her, Habsburgs gobbled up Central Europe like it was on clearance. Anne's life was a masterclass in elite inbreeding, born to a dynasty that valued borders over biology, stability over sanity, and still, somehow, ended up producing half the emperors in Europe. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, ruled in the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just trendy, it was basically a survival strategy for the upper class. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Maria of Valois, Joanna entered the world with royal legitimacy stamped all over her, along with at least 2 layers of cousin marriage in her DNA, her family tree, a Mediterranean spaghetti bowl. One side, the French house of Valois, the other, the Angevins of Naples. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, her marriage prospects, inevitably, also kings and cousins. Joanna's first husband, Andrew of Hungary, her cousin. Naturally, it was an awkward political arrangement, courtesy of the Pope, because nothing screams romance like a PayPal contract. Andrew was, by all accounts, unpopular, abrasive, and about as welcome in Naples as a plague. Ship. Joanna wasn't thrilled. The Neapolitan nobility wasn't thrilled. And not long after, Andrew was crowned co-ruler. He was murdered, probably strangled with a curtain cord, probably with Joanna's knowledge, if not her blessing. Let's call it a mutual incompatibility. Joanna went on to marry 3 more times. Louis of Toronto, her cousin. James, IV of Majorca, also a cousin. And Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, a minor noble with, scandalously, very little blood relation. It's wild times, if marrying within your own family was an Olympic event. Joanna took home gold 4 times. Politically, though, Joanna was a force. She ruled Naples in her own right, defied the papacy, and backed reforms in a kingdom notorious for corruption. At one point, she was even excommunicated for supporting the wrong pope during the Western Schism. You know you're playing medieval politics, right when both your relatives and the Vatican want you dead. Eventually, Charles of Durazzo, yet another relative, invaded Naples, overthrew Joanna, and allegedly had her smothered with a pillow. Given her track record with husbands and family, it was probably a weirdly familiar ending. Joanna ruled boldly in a man's world, married her way through nearly every royal bloodline, and, in the end, likely died in the arms of someone who shared her great-great-grandmother. Isabella Clara Eugenia, born in 1566, was the daughter of Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, yet another marriage between close cousins. By this point, the Habsburgs weren't a family so much as a heavily controlled genetic experiment funded by a crown budget. From the moment Isabella could hold a quill, she was groomed to rule. In Habsburg terms, that meant learning diplomacy, religion, and how to politely ignore the fact that half your uncles were also technically your cousins. Her father, Philip II, adored her, whether that was because she was intelligent and composed, or simply because she didn't rebel or try to marry outside the family. Hard to say. Isabella was considered a strong candidate to inherit the vast Spanish Empire, but the pesky matter of being female and the Habsburg obsession with keeping things in the family meant her future rested on one thing: marrying another Habsburg. Naturally, she did. She married Archduke Albert of Austria, her cousin, because, of course, together they were appointed co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands, which is a polite way of saying they were sent to govern a politically explosive region with constant uprisings, all while reporting back to Madrid. But Isabella handled it like a pro. She ruled with intelligence, religious devotion, plus, and the quiet confidence of someone who could recite every papal decree in her sleep, ever written, and still found time to micromanage her courtiers. Her marriage, too. Albert was reportedly happy, or at least peaceful, possibly because they shared enough DNA to communicate telepathically. He died in 1621. Isabella continued to rule solo as governor on behalf of the Spanish crown. She took religious vows and dressed as a nun, which didn't slow her down one bit. She oversaw peace treaties, kept the provinces. Somaliland even maintained a working post office. Yes, the Habsburgs trusted her to handle war, rebellion, and logistics. That's practically sainthood. Isabella died in 1633, leaving behind a reputation as one of the most competent rulers. After her reign was a rare moment where Habsburg inbreeding produced not just twitchy chins and erratic rulers, but actual competence. Marie of Burgundy was born in 1457, the only child of Charles the Bold, Guy of Burgundy, and Isabella of Bourbon. Her inheritance, a massive chunk of European land, family line that prided itself on noble marriages, with familiar surnames and the expectation that she'd marry another noble with equally recycled DNA. Her father, Charles the Bold, died in battle when Mary was just 19, leaving her suddenly in charge of the richest and most politically unstable duchy in Europe. Everyone wanted a piece of Burgundy. The French, the Habsburgs, didn't bore the cousins, especially the cousins, to stabilize things. Mary married Maximilian of Austria, future Holy Roman Emperor, and naturally her second cousinates removed a solid match by Habsburg standards, where the dating pool was basically just the family swimming in circles. The marriage was politically brilliant. Maximilian got access to the Burgundian territories, and Mary got an energetic husband who knew how to swing a sword and sign a treaty, often in the same afternoon. Despite being a power match, it was also reportedly affectionate, which is downright scandalous by arranged marriage standards. But her reign was short and dramatic. She was constantly pressured by French ambitions, rebellious Flemish cities, and courtiers who thought a woman shouldn't be allowed to rule unless she was sewing something. At the same time, Mary pushed back, signing the privilege to grant more rights to her subjects, asserting her authority alongside her husband, and generalizing the medieval equivalent of running a fortune. 500 company, with a baby on one hip, Then, in 1482, disaster. Struck while out hunting, because aristocrats often like to flirt with fatal injuries for sport. Mary fell off her horse, broke her back, and died at just 25. It was sudden, tragic, and the kind of ending that left Maximilian wearing black in Europe, scrambling to claim custody of their children. Her death was a turning point. Burgundy, once an independent powerhouse, got folded into the Habsburg Empire through her son, Philip the Handsome. Yes, that Philip, the one who married Joanna the Mad and passed his jawline to half of Europe. Maria Theresa of Austria was born in 1717. The only surviving child of Emperor Charles V. Since her birth was met with a royal shrug, since she was an assassin. But Charles, ever the optimist, or perhaps just blind to European politicist, the pragmatic sanction, a fancy imperial document that basically said, yes, I know she's a woman, but she still gets the empire. Okay, spoiler alert, Europe was not okay with that. When Charles VI died in 1740, Maria Theresa inherited the sprawling Habsburg dominions and a diplomatic mess. Nearly every European power challenged her right to rule. Why? Because she had the audacity to be a woman with a crown who hadn't married a first cousin yet. Actually, scratch that, she had. Maria Theresa married Francis Stephen of Lorraine, who was technically her distant cousin. Because, of course, their union produced 16 children, including future Empresskins and Marionette. Yes, to let them eat cake. One with that many offspring. Maria Theresa didn't just pass on the crown, she passed on all the chromosomes. But make no mistake, this was no pampered monarch hiding behind velvet curtains. Maria Theresa was one of the most effective rulers of her era. She reformed military, overhauled taxation, centralized bureaucracy, and modernized education, all while pregnant roughly every other year. It's the kind of multitasking that makes even modern supermams look like part-timers. And yet, she was still a Habsburg, speaking to a healthy level of micromanaging, strict Catholicism, and a reflexive preference for marrying her children into the same handful of families over and over again. The result, an even more tightly wound web of Habsburg cousins, now spread across all of Europe like an aggressively bred royal Irish, ruled until her death in 1780, having outlived her husband, survived multiple wars, and ensured that the Habsburg name stayed plastered across the continent for another generation. Or 5, her son Joseph, or Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, inherited the empire, and her genetic legacy continued marching stubbornly into the Enlightenment. Born in 1384, Yolande of Aragon was royalty from cradle to crypt, the daughter of King John I of Aragon and Violent of Bar. In other words, she had more noble surnames than most people had teeth, and naturally, her family tree was less tree and more repeated root system, where half your relatives doubled as potential in-laws. Yolande's upbringing was as regal as it gets. She was intelligently savvy, and, by medieval standards, dangerously opinionated. This made both a valuable dynastic prize and a nightmare for anyone expecting a quiet queen. Her marriage, Louis II of Anjou, a French prince, and yes, her cousin, because nothing says true love like she mutually shared great-grandparents as Duchess of Anjou and Queen Consort of Naples. Though only on paper, Yolande was never content to sit still and embroider coats of arms. She was the behind-the-scenes architect of alliances, the financier of armies, and fun fact, one of the few royals who actually managed to support Joan of Arc and survived the politics afterward. While her husband gallivanted about claiming thrones he couldn't really hold, Yolande ran things. She raised armies, negotiated treaties, managed estates, and acted as the true power in Anjou. Her children were married off to other royals, often cousins, and she personally made sure they were equipped with both political advantages and just enough Habsburg DNA to be considered legitimate her son. René of Anjou became known as the Good, possibly because he inherited his mother's brains and only some of her family's chromosomes. Her daughter Marie married Charles III of France, giving Yolande influence over the French throne and, more importantly, access to manipulate. Joan of Arc's military campaigns without ever lifting a sword. Yolande wasn't just another stitched-in name on a royal tapestry. She was one of the few medieval women who wielded power without officially holding a throne. Behind every weak king and ambitious general stood a Yolande, a Casanova rolling her eyes and correcting the map. She died in 1442, having outlived intimacy spans in the worst of the 100 Years' War. She was inbred, yes, but I'll sing Civ, calculating and every bit as influential as the kings. She quietly outplayed Margaret of York, was born in 1446 to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, two people so noble they could barely enter a room without tripping over their own heraldry as the sister of Edward IV. Richard III, and roughly half the War of the Roses. Margaret's DNA was already programmed for intrigue, bold decisions, and close proximity courtship, so naturally she married Charles, the bold Duke of Burgundy, a man known for his ambition, terrifying military obsession, and crucially for being yet another cousin. In the pan-European gene loop, their union in 1468 was less of battlements and more about making France nervous. Margaret brought English prestige, and Charles brought a remarkably pointy beard and unrelenting stubbornness. Despite the political matchmaking, their marriage was reportedly respectful and even, dare we say, functional. Margaret fitted surprisingly well at the Burgundian court, which was less dusty, medieval, and more pre-Renaissance. Instagram influencer, full of silks, tapestries, miniature dogs, and a dangerous obsession with embroidery. Her intelligence and diplomatic skills quickly earned her the nickname the Great Lady of the Netherlands. She played hostess to dignitaries, managed court finances, and even handled correspondence. One Charles was out doing Charles things, usually starting wars he couldn't finish. After he died, predictably, in battle, Margaret didn't pack up her gowns and retire. No, she doubled down, became regent and protector of her stepdaughter, Mary of Burgundy, an advisor to her stepson-in-law, Maximilian of Austria, and, yes, that's the Maximilian who married Mary and passed the Habsburg name into even more European branches. Like a particularly smug virus, Margaret didn't have children of her own, but her influence on dynastic politics was undeniable. She helped raise Philip the Handsome, the guy who married Joanna the Mad, and ultimately gave throne Charles V. So, if you're wondering where that dynasty's streak of self-important chin-heavy ambitions started, Margaret helped raise it. She died in 1503, outliving her brothers Mostov, her enemies in the fading golden age of Burgundy. She may not have added another strand to the Inbred family knot, but rest assured, she tied it tighter with impeccable etiquette and just enough royal smugness to make it last. Catherine de' Medici was born in 1519 into the powerful but somewhat scandal-prone Medici family of Florence, technically not born inbred by Habsburg standards, meaning she had at least a few non-cousins in her ancestry. Catherine soon made up for lost dynastic entanglement by marrying into the French royal family and producing a small army of genetically familiar monarchs. Her husband was Henry II of France. Not her cousin by blood, but definitely a close match politically. Their marriage was strategic. Italy meets France money, meets military power, and Medici ambition. Meets Bourbon drama. Catherine, for her part, adapted quickly. She arrived in France with no real influence, a suspicious accent, and an awkward third wheel named Diane Deacher, her husband's very public mistress. Undeterred, Catherine spent a decade quietly building alliances, learning court intrigue, and collecting children, 10 to be exact. And yes, most of them would go on to marry cousins, because while Catherine wasn't born a Habsburg, she certainly learned to parent like one when Henry died from a jousting accident because nothing screams fragile masculinity like taking a splintered eye for sport. Catherine became Queen Mother and suddenly the most powerful woman. In France, her sons Francis to Charles I, IX, and Henry III all took turns wearing the crown, and Catherine took turns ruling behind each of them. She was deeply Catholic but politically flexible, which in 16th century France meant occasionally funding Protestant weddings and occasionally arranging for the mass murder of Protestants at said weddings. Cal Street Bartholomew's Day massacre called for a reputation, took a hit after that one, even for a woman who married her daughters into 3 major European dynasties. That was considered excessive. Catherine was blamed for nearly everything: the wars of religion, the court's decadence, the suspicious poisoning rate at state dinners. But she was also a patron of the arts, a brilliant strategist, and somehow managed to keep the Valois dynasty stumbling food, despite constant wars, rebellious nobles, and family dinners that probably required food tasters and a lot of wine. She died in 1589, politically spent, but still plotting her legacy. A generation of royals who looked suspiciously similar and ruled with a blend of charm, Catholic guilt, and aggressive cousin hug and gin. Greece, falling asleep, wasn't just about getting rest. It was a sacred act, a bridge to the divine, and nowhere was this more literal than in these Apira dream temples dedicated to the healing god. These weren't cozy inns or rustic shrines. They were sprawling spiritual complexure. The sick, the weary, and the hopeful came not just for treatment, but for transformation. To prepare for sleep in these sanctuaries, you didn't just climb into bed. First came ritual purification. Prince had to fast for days, bathe in sacred springs, offer animal sacrifice, often abstain from sex or even certain thoughts. The goal was to cleanse both body and spirit before attempting incubation, a spiritual sleep where healing visions might appear inside the abaton, a dark enclosed chamber. Supplicants would finally lie down on stone slabs or animal skins. Torches flickered on the walls. Priests whispered prayers and burned incense. Sleep here was an intentional descent into another realm. Dreams were not random or meaningless. They were believed to be direct messages from Scipius himself, offering symbolic or occasionally very literal guidance. For healing, one might dream of snakes slithering over their body, which oddly enough was a good sign. Snakes were sacred to escapist, reapist, and rejuvenation and divine intervention. In fact, non-venomous snakes were apt and allowed to roam the temple grounds, especially the sleeping chambers. Used people knowingly fell asleep surrounded by snakes and considered it a divine honor. In the morning, the temple priests, many of whom acted more like dream analysts than doctors, would help interpret the visions. Sometimes they prescribed herbal remedies or changes in diet. Other times, the dream itself was to cure, believed to have realigned the soul or spirit. The Greek dream temple shows that sleep for ancient people wasn't just a biological necessity. It was a mystical voyage, a conversation with the gods, and, if you were lucky, that night whisper from the divine might not just mend your body, it might change your fate. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't merely the absence of waking, it was a miniature death, a time when the soul orbiter left the body and wandered through spiritual realms to guide that journey and protect that dreamer from malevolent forces. The Egyptians developed sleep rituals that were part mysticism, part medicine, and entirely woven into their cosmic worldview. Before going to bed, many Egyptians, especially the wealthy or priestly class, followed elaborate arcana nighttime routines. Incense played a central role. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just exotic aromas, they were sacred tools. Burning these resins was thought to cleanse the air of demons, invoke the favor of the gods, and calm the mind. Smoke itself symbolized the rising of prayers to the heavens, wrapping the sleeper in divine protection. Then came chanting or prayer, recitations often spoken aloud by priests or whispered privately by individuals. These spells weren't just soothing bedtime mantras, They were active spiritual defenses, invoking deities like the god of wisdom and dreams, or Bees, a squat, lion-faced dwarf god who warded off nightmares and evil spirits. Images of Bes were frequently carved onto headboards or painted on bedroom walls. His grotesque features were meant to scare off anything lurking in these shadows. The bedroom itself was prepared as a sacred space. Beds were often raised and made of woven reeds or wood, and some even included built-in amulets or protective symbols. Special headrests, which look wildly uncomfortable by modern standards, were believed to keep the soul aligned with stars during sleep. For the Egyptians, orientation mattered. Many aligned their sleep in direction to the rising sun or constellations like Orion, associated with Osiris in the afterlife. If one had troubling dreams or wanted divine insight, they might visit a temple, especially those dedicated to Serapis or Imhotep, where dream incubation rituals similar to those in Greece took place. Here to sleep was invited through incense, oils, and incense, but always with the intent of receiving guidance from beyond. For ancient Egyptians, preparing for bed wasn't just about comfort, it was a ritual. Its choreography meant to harmonize body, soul, and cosmos. Sleep was dangerous, sacred, and full of possibility. In ancient Babylon, the line between dream and destiny was razor thin. Sleep wasn't simply a passive act, it was a battleground of omens, spirits, and divine messages. Babylonians took their dreams seriously, so seriously in fact that entire professions revolved around them. Dreamprists, known as Shelu, were trained interpreters of the nightly visions that came to kings and commoners alike. Before going to sleep, Babylonians often performed protective rituals to ensure that the right kinds of dreams found them. It was believed that dreams could be sent by gods like Marduk or Ishtar, but also by demons or wandering spirits. Ward off malevolent forces. People wore amulets, placed protective tablets under their beds, and traced magical symbols around their sleeping quarters, a kind of astral security system. Incense, made from juniper, cedarwood, and tamarisk, was burned at sunset, filling the house with sacred smoke. This wasn't just to scent the air, it was believed to purify the environment and appease the gods. Sleep to the Babylonians wasn't just rest, it was a gateway to divine communication, and the gods preferred to clean and transmany. Babylonians recited nighttime prayers or incantations to encourage prophetic dreams. These prayers asked for clarity, protection from false visions, and safe passage through the dream world. Someone was hoping for guidance on a decision whether to go to war, plant a crop, or propose marriage. They might sleep in a temple or under the open sky, a practice called dream incubation's hope was that the gods would send a dream so vivid, so unmistakable, that it would guide the dreamer's actions. Then morning, and when the dreams came, they were recorded on clay tablets, synonymous, accompanied by sketches of their content over time. The Babylonians compiled dream dictionaries, massive catalogs of symbols, and their interpretations. Dream of a lion might mean victory in battle, dream of drowning, expect betrayal. These books were so influential that their structure would later influence Greek and Roman dream analysis. To the Babylonians, dreams weren't psychological. They were messages from the divine realm, and every night was a chance to read the gods' intentions. Provided performed the right rituals and slept under divine favor. In the ancient Vedic world of early India, sleep was more than a biological necessity. It was a cosmos fand. The Vedic texts, composed thousands of years ago, described sleep as a sacred state where the Atman, or soul, returns to the universal spirit, Brahman, before being reborn again at dawn. And like any sacred ritual, entering sleep required preparation, discipline, and awareness. One of the most important aspects of ancient Indian sleep culture was breath control, known as pranayama. Practitioners were taught to calm their minds and slow their breathing before bed, not to fall asleep quickly, but to align their breath with the pulse of the universe. This wasn't spiritual fluff, it was considered essential to help the soul travel peacefully during the night. Vedic sages believed that disturbed sleep could lead to mental confusion, spiritual imbalance, or even bad karma. So rituals were carefully followed. Many individuals recited evening mantras, Sanskrit hymns to praise the gods, or sought protection during slumber. A popular nighttime chant was the Gayatri mantra, often whispered while facing the direction of the setting sun. The sleeping space itself was important. It was considered inauspicious to sleep with your head pointed north. Instead, aligned with the realm of death, south was avoided for similar reasons. The preferred direction was east toward knowledge or west toward rest. People's natural bedding made of kuzass, cotton, or animal hides, believing certain materials could influence the soul's dreams. Oils and herbs also played a part in preparing for sleep. Ancient Ayurvedic texts describe the use of warm sesame oil massages before bed, known as a pyanga. This practice calmed the nervous system, relaxed muscles, and prepared the mind for deeper rest. Herbal infusions made from ashwagandha, brahmi, tulsi were consumed or burned as incense to promote lucid, insightful dreams. Dreams themselves were seen as reflections of one's inner truth, shaped by karma, desire, and purity. A disturbing dream wasn't just random, it was a signal that the soul was out of balance. In some cases, dream interpretation required consulting a rishi or spiritual teacher. In Vedic India, sleep wasn't an escape, it was a return, a reunion with the eternal self, wrapped in breath mantra and divine intention. In ancient China, particularly within Taoist traditions, sleep was more than rest. It was an energetic reset, a time when the body rebalanced its internal energies and the spirit journeyed beyond the physical realm to sleep. Well, it wasn't just about being tired, it was about being in harmony with the cosmos. According to Taoist philosophy, the human body was filled with qi, a vital life force, flowed through channels called meridians. If this flow was disrupted, sleep would suffer. So nighttime rituals were focused on preserving and regulating qi before bed. This involved specific diets, breathing exercises, postures, and even the timing of sleep. You didn't just go to bed, you entered the sacred process of tuning the body with heaven and earth. Taoist monks developed pre-sleep practices like qigong or slow, mindful movements paired with deep breathing. These were often followed by meditation to calm the shen or spirit, which was believed to reside in the heart. If the shen was agitated due to emotions, poor diet, or even noisy surroundings, the dreamer might experience nightmares, restless sleep, or even spiritual attacks. Sleep environments were carefully curated. Beds were made of wood or bamboo materials, thought to support good energy flow. Headrests were firm and low, so the body's alignment remained correct and qi circulated freely. Rooms were often sparsely decorated to avoid overstimulation. Cleanliness wasn't just a preference, it was energetic hygiene. The position one slept in also mattered. Lying on the right side was considered best for digestion and dream clarity. Feet and head direction were aligned with geomantic principles similar to what would later evolve into Funu. Dreams were seen as journeys of the hunt ethereal soul, while the Po, the physical soul, remained with the body. The Hun traveled through this spirit world during sleep. If a person awoke feeling depleted or frightened, it was believed their Hun had become lost or attacked. Protective talismans or Siniabar based charms were sometimes placed under pillows to keep spirits safe. Taoists didn't view dreams as mere psychology. They were diagnostic tools, spiritual maps of energy and karma. Sleep, when done properly, was a form of internal alchemy, a practice of nurturing immortality, one night at a time. Long before contact with Europeans, many indigenous American tribes regarded sleep and dreams as gateways to spiritual guidance, ancestral wisdom, and personal transformation. Among the Lakota, Navajo, Hopi, and other nations, dreams were not merely personal experiences. They were communal and cosmic messages that had the power to shape a person's destiny or even the fate of the tribe. Night rituals varied from tribe to tribe. A shared belief was that dreams connected the dreamer to the spirit world, often through the intervention of optimal guides, ancestors, or deities. To prepare for this connection, individuals engaged in ritual purification. One common method was the sweat lodge, a ceremonial steam bath used to cleanse the body and spirit. Participants would sit in a dome-shaped structure, fill it with steam from water poured over heated stones, chanting prayers and songs to invite guidance and clarity. Before sleep, for those seeking deeper visions, especially young men, coming-of-age tribes, practiced the vision quest, Issachar rite, involving fasting, isolation, and often sleeping in nature. For several nights, the initiate would find a remote location, construct a small space or skull, and sleep there under the stars, with no food, water, or company. The goal wasn't just survival, it was to dream. The dream would then be interpreted. Ritual elders or shamans, and often dictated the seeker's future role: warrior, healer, storyteller, or leader. In everyday life, many indigenous communities believed in dream catchers, a now popular symbol that originated with the Ojibwe Piaplates. Intricate webs of sinew and beads were hung above the bed to filter dreams, allowing only good ones to pass through, while trapping bad ones until the morning light dissolved. Them 4 children dream catchers were both protective and symbolic, helping the young navigate a world where dream scout, teach, warn, or bless. Elders were often revered as dream keepers, Sidmi, who carried knowledge of symbols and could decipher the meanings hidden within dreams. A vision of a Burmite signifies strength, while a hawk could indicate clarity or an approaching challenge. Dreams were rarely dismissed. They were discussed around fires, woven into myths, and sometimes even used to guide tribal decisions. Moaned indigenous American traditions. Sleep was a sacred dialogue with the unseen, not escape, but awakening in the cradle of civilization. Ancient Mesopotamia, sleep was tightly interwoven with the Divinus, Sumerians, Odeans, and later Babylonians believed that every dream was a message, and that the night itself was ruled by powerful gods who controlled what the dreamer would see. Sleep wasn't a break from reality. It was an active state of spiritual communication, and preparing for it was almost as important as the dream itself. The Mesopotamians had a rich pantheon of deities associated with the night and dreams. Chief among them was Nanchu, the goddess of social justice, prophecy, and dreams. Her temples welcomed those seeking answers through visions, especially during sacred festivals when the veil between the worlds was believed to beckon. Her worshippers would sleep in the temple precincts in hopes of receiving guidance through what they called dream incubation. To encourage meaningful dreams, people took ritual cleansing before sleep. This might include bathing in sacred rivers like the Euphrates, or Tigris, anointing the body with perfumed oils and reciting invocations to Nanchi Oraya, the god of wisdom. And magic priests often prescribe these rituals. Spiritual prescriptions for dreamers seeking help with illness, personal crisis, or political decisions. Inside homes, sleep chambers were modest but spiritually fortified. Small clay tablets with inscriptions or protective charms might be placed under pillows or hung near the bed. These included papatropic spells to ward off night demons like Lamashт, a fearsome female spirit said to harm women and children. The night amulets of the demon slayer, Pazuzu, were especially popular, positioned to guard sleepers from harm. Dream interpretation was a highly respected profession. Dream readers, or Baru, compiled thick manuals, proto-dream dictionaries, based on centuries of observed symbolism. These tablets categorize dreams by content, animals, weather, food, celestial events, and even the emotions felt during the dream. Alien might predict royal favor. Collapsing house might mean impending disaster. The Mesopotamians were early masters of structured oneiromancy, or divination, through dream sleep. In ancient Mesopotamia was never passive. It was a ritual, a risk, and a revelation. Entering the world of dreams meant entering the jurisdiction of the godsend. You better be prepared with your prayers, your oil, and your protective charms. Among the ancient Celtic peoples from the misty highlands of Scotland to the oak groves of Gaul, dreams were seen as portals to the other world, a mystic hellplane, inhabited by spirits, fae, ancestors, and deities, while the cults left behind fewer written records than some ancient cultures. Oral traditions and later Roman accounts revealed that sleep rituals among the Druids were rich with symbolism, mystery, and sacred intent. Druids, spiritual leaders and scholars of Celtic society, believed that during sleep the soul could cross keen to the other world, a place not of the dead but of deeper truth. This world existed in parallel with the human realm, and dreams were one of the rare bridges between the two. To access it, proper life, body and spirit had to be primed. Night rituals often began with purification using herbs, mugwort, vein, and yarrow plants, still associated with dreams and visions today, were burned or placed under pillows to enhance dream clarity. The smoke from these herbs was believed to thin the veil between worlds. Some even brewed them into teas or potions before bed, consumed with whispered prayers to the fair folk or ancestral spirits. Sleep spaces were deliberately chosen for geomantic alignments. Certain hills, stone circles, or sacred groves believed to be points of energetic convergence, places where dreams could be more potenter, the spirits more accessible during certain festivals, especially Samhain, the Celtic New Year, and ancestor celebration. People would sleep into Sirius to receive visions from their departed loved ones, or messages from gods like Bridge, or the Dagdarsum warriors and leaders reportedly sought prophetic dreams before battle, sleeping alone in caves or forests. After intense fasting and chanting, these dreams were believed to carry omens about victory or doom, and were treated with immense seriousness. Symbols from dreams like animals, colors, or landscapes were brought to the Philly Celtic poets and seers who interpreted them. In verse, a white stag might mean transformation. A dream of drowning in a forest might point to betrayal. Dreams were woven into Celtic mythology, shaping both personal destinies and communal stories. In the Celtic world, the night wasn't silent. It pulsed with whispers from beyond, carried into the dreams of those brave or pure enough to listening. Ancient Japan, the line between sleep magic and the unseen was carefully navigated through a spiritual system known as unmoto, the way of yin and yang, rooted in a blend of Taoist cosmology, Shinto spirituality, and Buddhist elements. Onoto offered both Ilataqua tears and commoners tools to protect the soul during slumber and to harness the messages embedded in dreams. Central to Onoto was the belief that the night was a time when the yin forces, dark, hidden, and often chaotic, were strongest. Sleep made a person vulnerable to possession by malevolent spirits known as yokai or yurai, and to being influenced by bad kan or directional energy. To combat this, practitioners used a variety of pre-sleep rituals that combined spiritual defense and purification. 1. Such ritual involved the placement of food paper talismans inscribed with sacred spells on bedroom walls or near sleeping mats. These charms were often blessed by an onioji, a specialist trained in astrology, divination, and exorcism. Could repel spirits, seal bad dreams, or channel good fortune. Before bed, it was also common to light incense made from sandalwood or a lozwood. The scent was believed to please guardian spirits and create a purifying barrier in noble households. Ritual chanting or silent recitation of Buddha sutras might be performed to calm the mind and invite peaceful sleep. Those particularly sensitive to the spirit world would sleep facing auspicious directions, never north, which was associated with death. Children were especially vulnerable, so they were often protected with engraved amulets or had special dolls placed nearby to absorb or ward off negative energy. These dolls, called hitagata, were thought to take on the burden of the sleeper's spiritual vulnerabilities. Drums themselves were frequently recorded in private journals or shared with monks and divers. If someone dreamed of fire, blood, or animals it could signify came pending illness, betrayal, or divine warning. Conversely, dreams of flying waterfalls or lotus flowers might herald spiritual growth or blessings. Dreams were messages, but only if Yak knew how to read them, and only if you survived the night unscathed. For the ancient Japanese, sleep was not to be taken lightly. It was a ritual, a strategy, and a spiritual gauntlet passed through nightly under the silent watch of spirits and stars. Long before the city of Alexandria dominated the Egyptian coastline, there was Heracleion, known to the Egyptians as Dynasties. For centuries, it stood as the primary port of entry into Egypt, a thriving center of commerce, religion, and diplomacy, where Greek merchants, Egyptian priests, and foreign emissaries crossed paths in a vibrant cultural melting pot. But by the time historians of the late medieval period were writing their chronicles, Heracleion had seemingly disappeared from history. Its location, forgotten, its name preserved only in faded texts and half-remembered myths. Many dismissed it as a legend, a sort of Egyptian Atlantis, and yet it was real. Heracleion once sprawled across the Nile Delta, its canals winding past massive stone temples and marketplaces. Monumental statues of gods like Amun-Ra and Horus towered above the harbor. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond docked there to pay taxes and seek permission to enter inland Egypt. Its customs house was one of the most important in the ancient world. It was also religious capital, a place where pharaohs would perform ceremonial rites to gain legitimacy from the gods before their reigns began. So, how does a city like that just vanish sometime between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE? A series of natural disasters struck the region: earthquakes, rising sea levels, and a sudden phenomenon called liquefaction, where the soil beneath the city essentially turned to jelly, caused entire sections of Heracleion to collapse into the Mediterranean Sea. Over time, sand and silt buried the ruins, and the currents of the Nile's east erased what remained from view. Heracleion was literally wiped off the map. For over 1,000 years, the city remained hidden beneath the waves, whispered about only in fragments by Herodotus and a few Greek scholars. No one truly believed it could be found, not until the year 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio made a shocking discovery off the coast of Abukia Bay. There, in the siltric seabed, lay a city preserved like a time capsule, waiting patiently beneath its 30 feet of water. Colossal statues, shipwrecks, gold coins, and inscribed steles began to surface, revealing that Heracleion had not been lost forever, only sleeping beneath the sea. At its peak, Heracleion was far more than a coastal outpost. It was the beating heart of Egypt's international trade, the first stop for foreign merchants and emissaries before they could pass further into the Nile's interior. Strategically positioned near the canopic mouth of the Nile, the city functioned as a customs checkpoint and a cultural filter. Everything coming into Egypt by sea had to pass through Heracleion. First, ships laden with olive oil, wine, incense, silver, cedar wood, and luxury textiles served from the Ion and the Levant. In return, Egypt offered its signature exports: papyrus, grain, linen, glacier, and gold. Heracleion was the first place where these exchanges were logged, taxed, and blessed, often under the watchful eyes of priestly officials and divine statues. The Greeks who arrived there were fascinated and often intimidated by what they saw. The temples were immense, carved from solid blocks of stone and flanked by statues over 5 meters tall. One temple in particular stood out, a massive sanctuary dedicated to Amlin Garb, the fusion of the Egyptian god Amlin and a local Detiferus would come here to receive the divine blessing of their rule, participating in ritual coronations that reinforced their legitimacy in the eyes of both gods and men. And yet, Heracleion was just about religion and trade. It was also a cosmopolitan city where Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and others lived, worked, and mingled. Artifacts recovered from the sea include inscriptions and both Greek and Egyptian amulets, jewelry, and even taxa quartz scratched into tablets. These finds reveal a city that thrived not on isolation, but on connection. A city that lived and breathed through its interactions with the wider Mediterranean world. Frank Godio's underwater excavations have uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, many of which were used to ferry goods to and from Heracleon's busy docks. Anchors, ceramics, and coins confirmed that trade was both extensive and regular. Temples kept detailed records of taxes collected from incoming cargo. Gold for the state, incense for the gods, and Heracleon was Egypt's maritime soul, a place where divine authority met international commerce. It stood as the guardian of the Nile, welcoming the world and guarding its secrets until the seer claimed them. One of the most astonishing revelations about Heracleon came not from coins or ships, but from massive temples that still rest beneath the sea. These weren't minor shrines tucked into corners. They were sprawling, monumental structures made of limestone and granite, dedicated to God's will, ruled the Nile and the cosmos itself. The crown jewel of the city was the Temple of Amun-Gareb, a massive religious complex that likely served both political and spiritual functions. It was here that pharaohs received divine sanction, performing rituals to confirm their legitimacy. Heracleon wasn't just a custom checkpoint. It was a place of ritual coronation, where Egyptian rulers spiritually tied themselves to Thadavine, ordered the concept known as Mayat. But the real marvel is how much of it still survives. When Frank Godio and his team dove beneath the silt-choked waters of Abuki Bay, they discovered colossal statues, many still standing upright. Some measured over 5 meters tall, including a massive statue of the god, a happy symbol of abundance. In the flooding Nileaters included statues of queens and pharaohs carved with astonishing precision. What's more shocking, some were found nearly intact despite being underwater for over 1,000 years. Then there were the steely giant stone slabs inscribed with hieroglyphs. One particularly important find was the Decree of Nectarinabo, an official proclamation carved into granite, which listed religious laws and temple privileges. Its survival underwater is a miracle in itself, and it offered hard proof that Heracleon wasn't just a myth, but a major religious hub, backed by the state. Temples in Heracleon were not only religious centers, they also acted as repositories of wealth and knowledge. Offerings from around the Mediterranean poured in gold alabaster jars, ritual knives, and incense burner. Statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus lined temple halls, and ceremonial boats were azed in sacred processions, some of which were found submerged, but astonishingly well preserved. What these temples reveal is clear: Heracleon was a spiritual capital, not just a trade port. The rituals performed here shaped the destiny of kings, blessed the economy, and bridged the world of the living with the realm of the gods, all now eerily silent but preserved in stone beneath the waves. For over 1,000 years, Heracleon was lost, buried beneath layers of sediment, forgotten by maps and dismissed by Manya's myth. But in the year 2000, the silence of the sea was finally broken. French underwater archaeologist Frank Godio, backed by the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology (IMASUM), made a discovery that would stun the world: the sunken remains of a city that defied time. Godio had spent years studying ancient texts and scouring the murky waters of Apukia Bay, just off the coast of modern Alexandria. The region had long been suspected of hiding secrets. Clues were buried in 3 writings of Herodotus, Strabo, and Egyptian records, all hinting at a once great city swallowed by the Mediterranean. But until Godio's expedition, no one had found physical proof. Using advanced sonar and magnetometries, teams scanned the seafloor, identifying anomalies hidden beneath silt. What emerged wasn't just a scattering of relics. It was a fully submerged city. Whole streets, canals, temples, statues, and shipwrecks lay preserved in the anaerobic depths, protected from erosion by layers of mud and river sediment. The first things recovered were colossal statues including two imposing five figures of atomic king and queen, believed to represent a ruling couple who had once governed. Heraclean soon followed a massive stele inscribed in both Egyptian and Greek, confirming the city's identity. The bilingual inscriptions were historians deem tangible proof that Thanos and Heraclean were, in fact, the same city now by different names to Egyptians and Greeks over the next few years. Gaudio's team covered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, thousands of coins, weights, religious artifacts, and ceremonial vessels. What made this discovery extraordinary wasn't just the volume, but the state of preservation. Unlike ruins found on land, these artifacts were untouched by looters, or whether frozen in time beneath the Silfranc. Gaudio's rediscovery of Heraclean wasn't just an archaeological achievement, it was a resurrection. A city believed to be legend was now re-emerging piece by piece, offering a stunning glimpse into a world thought lost forever, and perhaps most exciting of all, only a fraction of the city, being excavated. Heraclean still sleeps, waiting for the next Deve Heracleon's rise was spectacular, but his fall was slow, silent, and devastating. Like cities destroyed by fire or war, Heraclean vanished beneath the sea in a gradual, almost ghostly decline. There was no single day of doom. Instead, the city was lost through a series of natural disasters that unfolded over centuries, the kind of events too quiet to make headlines, but powerful enough to erase a civilization. The first culprit was tectonic activite. Nile Delta sits on a seismically active zone, and Heraclean's foundations were particularly vulnerable. Small but repeated earthquakes may have weakened the soft, waterlogged ground beneath the city, which was built on silt and clay rather than firm bedrock. But it wasn't just the tremors that doomed Heraclean. It was a geological phenomenon known as liquefaction. Liquefaction happens when the ground becomes saturated with water and loses its ability to support weight. Imagine a layer of wet sand suddenly turn into quicksand. That's what happened beneath Heraclean as earthquakes shook the delta on rising sea levels, pushed salt water further inland. The earth literally liquefied, and whole sections of the city began sink. Buildings, temples, even ships pulled downward into the mud. Over time, the city fragmented. Canals overflowed, quays collapsed, and temples began to tilt and vanish. Below the surface, the bustling port slowly became unusable. For centuries, it shipped westward toward Alexandria, which rose in prominence by the end of the 2nd century BCE. Heraclean's importance was waning by the 8th century CE. It had almost completely disappeared beneath the waters of the Mediterranean. What's chilling is how little anyone did to stop it, because no one could. Nature moved slowly but relentlessly. The people of Heraclean didn't flee in panic. They adapted, rebuilt, and prayed. And then, one day, it was simply gone. Boats still sailed over it submerged ruins. Fishermen cast their nets where stone gods once stood. The memory of Thessaly faded until even its name became legend. Today, Heraclean's sinking is a stark reminder. Even the greatest cities can be undone, not by enemies, but by that quiet, steady hand of nature. Heraclean may have vanished beneath the sea, but artifacts recovered from its ruins paint a vivid picture of what daily life might have looked like in this once thriving Egyptian port. Far from being a purely ceremonial or political center, Heraclean was a live den, bustling with markets, temples, courtyards, and shipyards, a place where people worshipped, traded, argued, and dreamed. The city's layout, partially mapped through underwater surveys, shows network of canals that ran between stone buildings and quays. Boats moved goods and people through the streets just as carts would have in other cities. Heraclean was often referred to as the Venice of Egypt, though it predates Venice by well over 1,000 years. Architecture blended traditional Egyptian forms, pylons, obelisks, and temple courts with Hellenistic influence brought in by Greek settlers. The people who lived here were a diverse mix: Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and other seafaring merchants. Excavated artifacts include Greek empoi, Egyptian scarabs, and gold coins stamped with various rulers' faces. This melting pot of cultures meant that multiple languages were spoken, multiple gods were worshipped, and multiple traditions coexisted, often within the same household religion, was central to overread. Life mourning offerings to deities like Ammon, Isis, and Osiris various routine, as breakfast temples weren't just for ceremony, they acted as ikones and genes. Employing artisans, scribes, and priests, they stored wealth, administered law, and even recorded taxes, once steelly recovered from the citary vaults. Detailed temple protocols, including the taxation of imported goods, proving that religious life and trade were separately linked. Food came from both land and sea. Fish and shellfish were abundant, thanks to the Nile deltas, brackish waters, while inland farms supplied grains, figs, and beer. Markets near the quays would have been noisy, colorful places filled with spices, textiles, and stories from faraway lands. And, of course, there was entertainment. Statues and inscriptions suggest the presence of music, dance, and festivals, especially those honoring Osiris, which included ritual, boat processions, and dramatic performance. Heracles was not just functional, it was alive in the end. Heracleon wasn't just a port or a holy site, it was a home. Its people lived ordinary lives beneath the shadows of colossal gods, unaware that their world would someday become legend. Tantomed in water. As Heracleon's fortunes began to decline, a new city was rising. Just a short sail down the coast, Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. In many ways, Alexandria didn't just suck it, Cutling it supplanted it, becoming the jewel of the Mediterranean and the new beating heart of Egypt's maritime and intellectual life. But the relationship between the two cities wasn't purely competitive. It was part of a larger transformation in Egypt's political and cultural identity. At the time of Heracleon's prominence, Egypt was still ruled by native dynasties, and the city's importance was rooted in traditional Egyptian religion and its strategic location near the Nile Delta's entry point. Heracleon was where foreign ships were inspected, taxes were collected, and divine rituals legitimized king. But when the Greek rulers who succeeded Alexander took power, they shifted focus dramatically toward Greek customs, urban planning, and administration. Alexandria, with its grand library, massive lighthouse, and sweeping harbors, was built to impress and centralize power. The Tummies channeled trade through a new city, bypassing Heracleon in favor of a fresh Hellenistic capital. They imported Greek architecture, philosophy, and governance, and made Alexandria not just a trade hub, but a center of science, art, and politics. But for a time, the two cities coexisted. Religious ceremonies were still held in the Heracleon and Thalastraeum operational. However, the balance was shifting. Administrative control moved to Alexandria, as did the elite classes and international attention. Heracleans slowly became a shadow of their former self. Still holy, still respected, but no longer essential. Then came the environmental blow. The liquefaction of the ground. The rising sea levels, and the eventual submergence of Heracleon. As the city disappeared beneath the waves, Alexandria rose, untouched, its coastal position more stable and better fortified. It inherited the legacy and the traffic that Heracleon once enjoyed it. The ruins of both cities tell two sides of the same story. While one lies buried beneath the sea, its stones wrapped in silence, the other still buzzes with life, though much of its ancient grandeur has faded. But without Heracleon, there would be no Alexandria. Old City was the gateway and the foundation upon which Egypt's future was built. When Heracleon slipped beneath the sea, it took with it not just temples and statues, but the everyday belongings and sacred objects that defined life in a great city. and thanks to the oxy-gemper-siltric waters of Abukia Bay. Many of these items have been preserved in astonishing condition, allowing modern archaeologists to piece together not just what the city looked like, but how its people lived, worked, worshipped, and among the most breathtaking discoveries are the colossal statuettes, measuring over 5 meters tall. These include representations of Ptolemaic rulers, Egyptian deities like Isis and Hapi, and even monumental sphinx-style, toppled by time. Many were found lying where they fell, surrounded by temple debris, as the moment of collapse had been frozen in mud. Their expressions, posture, and inscriptions are still visible, testifying to the artistic skill of the city's craftsmen. But it's not just the monumental that survivors have uncovered thousands of smaller artifacts: gold coins, lead weights, ceremonial tools, jewelry, and fragments of pottery. One particularly fascinating find was a cache of bronze ritual vessels, likeliest in temple ceremonies, bearing intricate inscriptions and religious iconography. Others include oil lamps, writing tools, and personal adornments, the kinds of things someone might have carried in a satchel or kept on a home altar. Heraklion was also a port, and its maritime legacy is undeniable. Over 70 shipwrecks have been identified, many preserved, with their cargoes still aboard. Wooden hulls, anchors, and nautical tools have helped researchers understand how ancient Egyptians and their foreign visitors navigated. Trade. Some ships even appear to have sunk while docked, suggesting they went down during the same seismic events that doomed the city. Perhaps most mysterious are the stele and bilingual inscriptions. Written in both ancient Egyptian and Greek, these texts serve as legal documents, religious edicts, and temple inventories, offering direct testimony from the past. One stele confirmed the city's dual identity as both Thonis and Heraklion, solving a historical mystery that had puzzled scholars for generations. In essence, the sea became Heraklion's Sakis Tau Museum, a place of ruin, yes, but also of preservation. The artifacts pulled from the depths are not just remnants, they are living whispers from a forgotten world. Etched in stone, bronze, and Silas Heraklion may be underwater, but its story is far from buried. In fact, the city's rediscovery has sparked a renaissance in how we understand ancient Egypt's relationship with the sea, with foreign cultures, and with the divine. What was once dismissed as a myth, a name whispered by Herodotus, believed by scholars, is now a powerful reminder that history still holds secrets waiting to rise from thought deep. In many ways, Heraklion challenges the traditional image of Egypt as Art civilization locked along the Nile. This was a maritime site, cosmopolitan and open to the world. Its culture was not static or insular, a temperate foreign influence while retaining a deeply Egyptian soul. The very existence of bilingual inscriptions and Egyptian religious fusion shows a society that was adaptive, fluid, and complex. For archaeologists and historians, Heraklion is a goldmine, not just of physical objects, but of context. It helps fill the gaps in our understanding of Egypt's late dynastic and early Hellenistic periods. It shows us what a living port city looked like, how temples functioned, aspect, sacred, and bureaucratic centers, and how natural disaster could slowly unmake an empire's gateway. But the city's legacy isn't just academic, it's deeply human. The statues, the coins, the wrecked ships, they tell stories of real POP merchants tallying cargo, priests whispering incantations in temple courtyards, sailors docking in foreign harbors under the eyes of stone gods, mothers praying to Isis for their children's safe child of that life preserved underwater. Silent for 1,000 years now, speaks again. The discovery of Heraklion has also changed the future of archaeology itself. It's proof that submerged cities aren't fantasy. The rise of sea levels and shifting modern scientists are now rethinking what might lie beneath other coasts: Carthagena, Alexandria, even parts of India and Southeast Asia. Heraklion has become a blueprint for uncovering the past in the most unexpected, Places today, its treasures are displayed in museums. Its story is told in documentaries and books, but the city still sleeps beneath the waves. Mausoleum explored, Vase. T. in waiting Heraclean is no longer lost, but it remains a mystery, a ghost city between worlds, whispering across time from a sunken age. Avgod's trade in vanished empires, long before modern dentistry and fluoride toothpaste. Ancient humans already understood a painful truth tooth to thatches suck, and they didn't just suffer through them, they actually tried to treat them. In fact, some of the earliest evidence of care goes back nearly 9,000 years, showing that early humans were far more medically inventive than we tend to assume in the meager region of present day. Pakistan archaeologists uncovered human remains dating back to around 7,000 BCE. What they found stunned the scientific community. Several skulls with teeth that had been drilled using flint tools weren't accidental marks or signs of trauma. They were precise, intentional holes, carefully bored into MERS. The teeth belonged to adult individuals, meaning they survived the drilling process, and if that sounds painful, it probably was theirs. No evidence of anesthetic, just grit, sharp stones, and the willingness to endure agony in the name of relief. These drills were likely powered by bowstrings using a technoquesomiller, to fire-starting back and forth spinning that allowed the flint bit to grind into enamel. It's the least known form of dentistry, predating Egyptian civilization by millennia. Did they do what theories suggest? It was to remove decayed materia. Relieve pressure from abscesses, or possibly even for ritual reasons. In some cases, the teeth showed signs of bumenon or resin, which might have been used to seal the cavity after war. D. A very crude form of filling. This wasn't an isolated case. In other prehistoric cultures, teeth were filed, pulled, and even stained. Among some African and Indonesian groups, tooth modification was common, not always for medical reasons, but as a form of social identity or spiritual protection. Still, this fact remains: humans understood the importance of their teeth and weren't afraid to go DIY when decay set in. Even in these early eras, dental problems were more than just annoying, they could be deadly. Untreated abscess could lead to infection, fever, and even death, which explains why, in a world without antibiotics, drilling out the rod, no matter how crude the method, may have saved lives. So while they lacked porcelain crowns and no vacca people weren't clueless. They faced dental pain with stone tools, raw courage, and shocking precision, and setting the stage for everything that came next when it comes to ancient medicine. Egypt often steals the spotlight, and dentistry was no exception. The Egyptians did choose acknowledge tooth problems. They created an entire medical field around it. In fact, the world's first known dentist was an Egyptian named Hesi-Ra, who lived around 2600 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Jose. His tomb bears the title chaff of dentists and physicians, suggesting that dental care was already a respected profession in the Old Kingdom. But if you're picturing a calm clinic with copper tools and smiling, Cations think again Egyptian dentistry was an intense blend of practical techniques and magical incantations. Famous Ibis Papyrus A3, 500-year-old medical text, includes remedies for toothaches, infections, and gum disease. Some treatments involved chewed herbs and honey, both of which have antimicrobial properties. Others, however, involved placing a dead mouse on each tooth and reciting spells to drive away evil spirits. Exactly. Ada-approved Egyptians also understood the concept of oral hygiene, used twigged toothbrushes, chewed on aromatic sticks to freshen breath, and even made rudimentary toothpaste from crushed eggshells, ox hooves, pumice, and myrrh. It was gritty, abrasive, and not particularly minty, but it worked in terms of real procedures. Evidence from excavated mummies shows attempts at dental surgery. Some skulls showed drilled MERS, similar to those in prehistoric Pakistan, while others have abscesses that appear to have been drained. There are also signs of crude splints to stabilize loose teeth still. Most Egyptians likely suffered through dental problems without major intervention. Stirred dietas filled with stone ground bread introduced plenty of sand and grit into their mouths. Teeth, which wore teeth down prematurely and caused fractures. Interestingly, archaeologists have found gold wires and metal bands in a few skulls. Possibly the earliest examples often tell bridges or stabilization devices. Whether they were used in life or added posthumously debate. But they prove. One thing Egyptians were thinking creatively about how to preserve the structure of the mouth, in essence insentient. Egyptian dentistry was part science, part superstition. K understood infection, practiced hygiene, and experimented with surgical tools, all while invoking gods like Sekhmet and Th. They may not have had anesthetic, but they had ambition, and that made all the difference. While the Egyptians were mixing myrrh and dogs' hooves into gritty toothpaste, the Etruscans of ancient Italy were pioneering something far more glamorous: dental prosthetics, long before the Romans dominated the Mediterranean. These highly skilled artisans were crafting what could be considered the first dental bridges, elegant, functional solutions to missing teeth that would influence dentistry for centuries, dating back to around 700 BCE. Etruscan burial sites have revealed skulls fitted with gold bands and wire ligatures holding replacement teeth in place. These weren't just functional fixes. They were status symbols. In many cases, their replacement teeth were not artificial at all. They were real human or animal teeth, sometimes from oxen, fitted neatly alongside the living teeth using loops of fine gold. It was delicate, precise, quite possibly painful, but it worked. The Etruscans were known for their metallurgical skill, and that extended to dentistry. The gold bands used in their bridges were soft enough to manipulate, yet strong enough to hold teeth securely in place. These were not quick fixes for commoners. Rather, they were custom dental work for the elite, likely performed by skilled metalworkers or physicians associated with religious or noble households. What's remarkable is how aesthetic their dental solutions were. These bridges weren't just functional, they were crafted to restore facial symmetry and preserve appearance. The Etruscans understood, long before modern cosmetic dentistry, that missing teeth altered not just chewing, but the entire shape of the face in a society where appearance and status were deeply intertwined. This mattered a great deal. There's no direct evidence that they performed extractions or surgeries, but the presence of dental appliances suggests that oral health was actively managed, and not purely for medical reasons like their elaborate tattoos and intricate jewelry. Etruscan dental work reveals a people deeply invested in presentation, legacy, and dignity, even in death. Some of these dental bridges remained in place after burial, suggesting they were worn in life and carried into the afterlife, a sign of how intimately dental care was tied to identity in a world without dentures or implants. The Etruscans' gold-bound bridges were a mark of innovation and elegance, a gleaming smile from a civilization ahead of its time. By the time the Roman Empire rose to power, dentistry had evolved into a mix of practical treatments, surgical experimentation, and questionable cosmetics. Romans didn't just inherit medical knowledge from the Etruscans and Greeks, they expanded it, codified it, and added their own uniquely Roman flair. Think of it as ancient dental care with a touch half militarized efficiency and vinegar rinse. One of the most famous Roman medical writers, Oes Cornelius Celsus, described dental procedures in his medical encyclopedia De Medicina. He noted techniques for extracting teeth, treating toothaches, and even cleaning the mouth with abrasive powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. Some recipes included urine, which sounds terrifying today, but actually provided a natural source of ammonia, a potent cleaning agent. Yes, Romans used urine as mouthwash, bottled and imported from provinces like Portugal and Gaul. It was prized for its whitening effect on teeth. Elite Romans seeking bright smiles may have suffered through daily gargles of fermented ammonia, followed by a rinse off wine or vinegar to freshen the breath. Vanity, it seems, can override disgust beyond that. Roman physicians used forceps, scalpels, and dental elevators for extractions and oral sagarious metal. Tools have been found in excavation sites alongside surgical kits, showing that dentistry, while painful, was done on common soldiers, in particular, received treatment for broken or abscessed teeth. Oral health was considered vital to combat readiness. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to early prosthetics inspired by Etruscan designs. These included bridges secured with gold wire and replacement teeth made from ivory or bone like their predecessors. Romans saw teeth as status symbols. A full white smile was associated with beauty, power, and good breeding, especially in the public arenas of the forum or the baths. Even the philosopher Pliny the Elder chimed in, recommending remedies like burnt mouse ash for toothaches, orcuing mint for bad breath. His works, while eccentric, reflect how deeply oral health was woven into everyday Roman life. In the end, Roman dentistry was as advanced as it was brutal, painful, certainly effective occasionally, but for an empire obsessed with control, hygiene, and appearance, taking care of one's teeth was a Roman duty, no matter how strange the methods. While ancient Mediterranean civilizations were using gold, wire, and crushed bones to clean their teeth, the Mare of Mesoamerica were turning dentistry into a literal art form for the Maya. Dental modification wasn't just about health, it was about status, identity, and spiritual symbolism. They didn't just fix teeth, they adorned them, carved them, and embedded them with precious stones, all without modern anesthesia. Archaeological findings from sites in present-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras have revealed skulls with intricate dental work dating back over 1,000 years. Many Mayan elites had inlays of jade, turquoise, hematite, or obsidian fitted into their front teeth, not after death, but while they were alive. The inlays were carefully set into small, perfectly drilled holes in the enamel. Using primitive rotary tools tipped with obsidian or other sharp stones, it's believed they used water-powdered quartz or even plant resins as lubricants and adhesives to keep the gems in place. The precision of these modifications is astounding. The drilled holes are so symmetrical and clean that researchers Bill the Mere had a deep understanding of dental anatomy, even if they didn't frame it. In medical terms, remarkably, there's minimal evidence of nerve damage or infection, suggesting these procedures were not only common but successfully executed. But why did they do it? The answer less in cultural meaning. For the Maya, the mouth was a powerful symbol, the place where breath and speech emerged, both considered sacred. Modifying teeth was a way to honor the gods, signal elite status, or align oneself with cosmic forces. Jade, for example, was associated with life, fertility, and divine favor. A ruler with jade inlaid teeth wasn't just showing off, they were embodying sacred authority. Thori, the Maya, also practiced tooth filing, gray shaping canines and incisors into points. Not unlike vampire fangs or symbolic glyphs, in some cases, the designs mimicked animal forms, likely invoking spiritual protection or transformation. And while some dental work served ceremonial purposes, evidence suggests those were functional repairs, like filled cavities or drilled abscesso. The Mer weren't just performing ritual art, they were also treating real dental problems. Centuries before European dentistry had caught up to the Mer, dentistry was a fusion of medicine, magic, and aesthetics, a worldview drilled into every glittering smile line. Ancient China dentistry wasn't a separate science, it was deeply integrated into the broader philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, rather than isolating the mouth as a separate unit. Chinese physicians believed that oral health reflected the health of the entire body. A sore tooth wasn't just a dental issue, it was a sign of internal imbalance in the organs, particularly the stomach and kidneys. And while they didn't use drills or bridges like other civilizations, the Chinese developed a sophisticated system of preventive and herbal dentistry. that spanned centuries as early as 3000 BCE. Writings and texts like the Hanged Ning, the Yellow Emperors, and a canon made mention of dental issues. Ancient practitioners mapped meridians, energy channels that connected the teeth to specific organs, for example pain in the lower malar issues in the bladder or stomach, rather than Attican-themed Chinese medicine sought to restore balance through diet, acupuncture, and herbal treatments to keep teeth healthy. Daily oral hygiene was emphasized. People chewed fragrant wigs from aromatic trees like willow and miswak to clean their teeth, similar to toothbrushes. She also used saltwater rinses, crushed herbs, and even powdered bone to scrub away. Build-up tooth powders often included cloves, mint, rhubarb, root cinnamon, and ginseng, all aimed at freshening breath, reducing inflammation, and strengthening gums. Toothaches were treated using acupuncture, specifically targeting points along the jaw, neck, and even hands to relieve pain and stimulate healing. This non-invasive approach was often paired with picasis, mixtures of ground herbs applied directly to the gum or cheek to dry out infection or ridge swelling. Interestingly, ancient Chinese texts also reference tooth regeneration techniques using mineral pasts or spiritual rituals involving dragon bones, fossilized animal bones believed to carry potent key life energy. These bones were ground into powders, sometimes mixed with wine or herbs, to create a kind of early medicinal paste. There is limited evidence of surgical intervention or tooth extraction in early Chinese civilization, but that may reflect the cultural emphasis on preservation and balance rather than invasive correction. In many ways, their focus on prevention, clean diets, consistent hygiene, and body-wide balance mirrors some of the best practices of modern holistic dentistry. For the ancient Chinese, the path to a healthy mouth began not in the mouth, but in the harmony of the entire body. In ancient India, oral health wasn't treated in isolation. It was considered a vital part of the body's overall balance. And energy flow, rooted in the ancient medical system known as Ayurveda, dating back over 3,000 years. Vedic texts like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain detailed observations on dental care, tooth diseases, and remediation, of which are surprisingly aligned with modern understanding. A Vedic approach to dentistry emphasized prevention, purification, and daily rituals. One of the most enduring practices was dantavana, or daily tooth cleaning using herbal chewing sticks. These sticks came from specific trees like neem, licorice, or babool, all of which have antibacterial properties. People will chew on one end until it frayed, then use it to brush their teeth. This practice still exists in parts of rural India today, but oral care didn't stop there. Ayurveda also advocated oil pulling, now as kavala or gandia, where oil, usually sesame or coconut, was swished in the mouth for several minutes. This wasn't just a hygiene ritual. It was believed to pull toxins from the body, strengthen teeth, gums, and jaw. Modern studies have found that oil pulling might actually reduce harmful bacteria and improve gum health. Giving ancient wisdom some scientific credibility. The Sushruta Samhita, attributed to the surgeon Sushruta around 600 BCE, contains chapters specifically on tooth extraction, jaw fractures, and oral ulcers. Sushruta described surgical instruments for removing damaged teeth and draining abscesses using iron tools and herbal pastes to disinfect the area. He also recommended cauterization, burning the infected area with a heated tool for severe cases of decay or gum disease. Painful, yes, but methodical. Ayurveda classified dental diseases into categories like dantaharusha, tooth sensitivity, dant, shakura, tarta, bildupant. Dantovesta gum inflammation treatments were tailored according to a person's dasha, their body constitution, vata, pitta, or kapha, and could involve dietary changes, herbal rinses, and event meditation to reduce stress-related grinding or jaw tension. For the ancient Indians, the mouth was a sacred gateway, a channel through which speech, nourishment, and breath all proceed. Keep it clean, healthy, and balanced was not just a health decision, It was a spiritual obligation in a Ayurvedic dentistry, wasn't just a branch of medicine. It was a daily act of alignment between body, mind, and spirit. In the ancient Greek world, medicine and dentistry were deeply influenced by philosophy, observation, and early anatomy alike. Some civilizations that saw disease as purely spiritual, the Greeks, especially from the classical period onward, sought rational explanations for pain and decay, including dental issues, and while they didn't have dentists in the modern sense, their physicians practiced surprisingly advanced oral care for their time. Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and Aristotle wrote about teeth in medical and anatomical terms. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, described the structure and eruption of teeth, causes of tooth decay, and even methods of extractions. Believed that imbalances in the bodies for humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile could lead to dental disease, especially gum infections, and tooth pain. For the Greeks, diet played a central role in oral health. Physicians warned that soft, sticky, or overly sweet foods could cause decay. Instead, crunchy foods like apples, grains, and legumes were encouraged for scraping residue off teeth. There's also mention of chewing mastic gum, a resin from the mastic tree, to freshen breath and clean the mouth, a practice still popular in the Mediterranean today. When problems did occur, Greek physicians employed treatments that ranged from herbal remedies and spices to rudimentary surgical procedures. Tooth extractions were done using metal forceps, often without anesthesia. The pain was intense, but sometimes relieved with herbal sedatives like opium, poppy, mandra, or henbane. For abscesses, physicians used lancing techniques to release infection, often followed by salt or wine rinses. For disinfection, Aristotle took a particularly detailed interest in teeth, even noting that men and women had different numbers of murs, which turned out to be incorrect, but demonstrated his effort to systematism in anatomy. The Greeks also documented rare dental conditions such as teeth erupting later in life, or even congenital toothlessness. Dentistry was not considered a separate field. A part of general medical training, physicians treated everything from ulcers to fractures in teeth, were just another part of the body to be studied and healed. In essence, ancient Greek dentistry was a fusion of science, observation, and pain tolerance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in the belief that the body, even its teeth, could be understood, predicted, and corrected through logic and learning. Across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, ancient dentistry evolved as a single linear science, but as a global tapestry of innovation, ritual, and resilience. From flint drills in prehistoric Pakistan to gold bridges in Etruria, from jade-inlaid Mayan murs to Ayurvedic oil pulling, early societies approached dental care with a mix of bravery, ingenuity, and sheer necessity. Their tools were primitive, and pain management often non-existent. Ancient cultures made surprising light-epistasy advances. They didn't have bacteria, theory, or x-rays, but they understood that rotting teeth caused suffering, and they did what they could to intervene, whether by drilling out decay, using herbs to numb the pain, or crafting prosthetics to preserve appearance. These early dentists or healers, priests, and artisans, moonlighting as such, laid the foundation of a medical art that would eventually become a modern profession. More striking still is how interdisciplinary ancient dentistry was. It wasn't just medical, it was spiritual, cosmetic, philosophical, and even political. In some cultures, a bright gemstone-studded smile conveyed divine favor or social status. In others, missing or misshapen teeth were tied to personal imbalance, or even considered omens from God's oral health. It turns out, was never just about chewing the tools left behind: obsidian blades, copper probes, gold ligatures, herbal scrolls, arrayed fragments of a story that stretches across continents. They prove that ancient people, often thought of as primitive or superstitious, were curious problem solvers. They watched, they experimented, and they passed down what worked in many of their practices. Enduru, still floss, rinse, and brush we use herbal ingredients like clove, mint, and myrrh. Some even continue ancient customs like oil pulling or chewing neem sticks, not because they're nostalgic, but because they work modern dentistry with its implants, lasers, and 3D imaging macing worlds apart from stone drills and mouse skull pickuses. But the goal remains same: relieve pain, preserve teeth, and improve lives.